own war criminals is one which is absolutely essential to fulfill. The problem being, over many decades, the Israeli military justice system has proven, in most cases, utterly incapable of holding Israeli nationals to account.
To a large extent, the perpetrators are also nationals of the countries, and therefore they should be held accountable under their national framework. And I'm referring to nationals who have been fighting in the Israeli army, individuals who live in the settlements and might have committed violence against the Palestinians. There are many who have double nationalities, Western nationalities, but also Arab nationalities, a number of them. And there are Western citizens who are selling and purchasing property stolen from the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. I discovered that this happens in Canada and elsewhere in the world. And also there are businesses, charities, pension funds, banks. For this, you will have to wait for my next report, because this is what I'm investigating.
Of course, these 2 arrest warrants are only part of the story. Anyone who's engaged in crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes should be held accountable for those crimes as well.
Another case of the lawlessness that Israel demonstrates in the area. Attacks without provocation against a sovereign state.
Iman Khariji from Kuna. I have just a simple question, actually. The ICC decision against Netanyahu and Gallant is just against 2 people. So I know the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice, but my question is, have you a list, or are you preparing a list of all the names that are responsible against in this genocide? Not just officers in Israel, but also all these person in other countries, but especially in Israel. Thank you so much.
Is the question for the Special Rapporteur?
I think it's an important question, because it allows me to say that, of course, these 2 arrest warrants are only part of the story. As my colleagues have already said, every state around the world has the obligation to ensure, uphold, protect international humanitarian law and to end any genocide. And that means that they should be taking all affirmative steps to ensure that they're preserving evidence, that they are taking steps to cooperate with those bodies that are undertaking efforts to bring people to justice. And then they should be using whatever is available within their own legal system to take the steps they need to hold people to account as well. So I talked specifically about the ICC because I'm very concerned about the attacks by different states on that body, and because it has an important role to play in holding those at the highest levels to account. But of course, anyone who's engaged in crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes should be held accountable for those crimes as well.
Thank you very much, Meg. If I may chime in with a complementary information. The system that the International Criminal Court is premised upon is based on complementarity. Therefore, the role of national courts, I keep on saying, is so relevant, not only because there is a universal jurisdiction on crimes like genocide, but also because to a large extent the perpetrators are also nationals of other countries, and therefore they should be held accountable under their national framework. And I'm referring to nationals who have been fighting in the Israeli army, individuals who live in the settlements and might have committed violence against the Palestinians. There are many who have double nationalities, Western nationalities, but also Arab nationalities, a number of them. And there are Western citizens who are selling and purchasing property stolen from the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. I recently discovered that this happens in Canada and elsewhere in the world. And also there are businesses, charities, pension funds, banks. For this, you will have to wait for my next report, because this is what I'm investigating. But again, it's an incredible realm of untapped opportunities for justice.
I'd just add that, international justice and foreign universal jurisdiction war crimes cases are, of course, absolutely critical, but they'll only ever prosecute a very, very small number of perpetrators. That's why Israel's obligations under the Geneva Convention to investigate and prosecute its own war criminals is one which is absolutely essential to fulfill. The problem being, over many decades, the Israeli military justice system has proven, in most cases, utterly incapable of holding Israeli nationals to account. When prosecutions are in rare cases, they often end in very light penalties relative to the severity of the crimes. I mean, ultimately, what is needed is a broad-based truth and reconciliation and justice process in Palestine, and for that, you need the right political conditions. You need a change of away from extreme right-wing governments, which Israel has been afflicted by in recent years. Like we've seen positive examples in other countries. I mean, I think Colombia is a great example of a political and social system that has moved past that really protracted violence over many, many decades and is seriously trying to bring both sides to account in a broad-based process which deals with thousands of perpetrators, not just the very senior leaders. And I think we should expect more on the Middle East. We shouldn't just expect that a couple of leaders might face justice, in theory, because there's an arrest warrant. We should demand that all victims receive the accountability and reparation they're entitled to through tracking down, hunting down every person on either side who has committed international crimes.
Thank you. We'll take this question and then go on.
Merci, Jérémy Lange pour Français RFI. Je me permets de poser la question en français, puisque je sais que vous êtes francophone, Madame Albanese. Vous avez appelé un certain nombre de choses. Alors vous dites la justice principalement, mais vous avez notamment appelé à la suspension, je crois, d'Israël des...
Sont des bureaux, des centres de distribution services and weapons that have been tested on the discussions
from what's going on in Gaza, or conversations with people indicating.
Voilà, un exemple que la légalité n'est pas, le respect de la légalité n'est pas optionnel.
Nina, and then we'll move to questions online and come back to the room.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. Nina Larson, also AFP. Just to follow up on that, I was just wondering if you've had conversations with people indicating that there is a movement towards wanting to exclude Israel and remove their voting rights. And the other question was on Syria. I'm wondering if you are concerned that what's happening in Syria right now is removing the focus from what's going on in Gaza, or maybe it's highlighting, as you were mentioning, Israel's actions more broadly, given their airstrikes. If you could just comment on that. Thank you.
I will be brief on the first question, but also I would like to invite my colleagues to comment on the second part of your question. Honestly, I've had engagement with regional groups and individual states on my recommendations. I would say that most of the discussions I've led were on the need to impose sanctions on Israel, to stop the trade of arms, oil, and goods, and not just what is sold, what is transferred directly and indirectly, what is purchased from Israel. Because it's incredible that there are member states that are still trading and buying surveillance services and weapons that have been tested on the Palestinians. So honestly, this has taken more of my bilateral engagement when I was in New York and after the presentation of my report. I've heard there are member states from the Global South picking up on it. Again, the fact of having that on the table is to remind people of what complying with international law means and what not complying with international law might imply, because it seems that it's really totally can be neglected ad libitum as it pleases. May I leave the other colleagues to respond on the second part of the question?
Yeah, look, briefly, I'd say, of course, states and the media have a pretty short attention span and can only deal with one crisis at a time, it seems. I mean, this was the complaint Ukraine made when Gaza happened, that no one was talking about Ukraine anymore, and then and now it's, maybe Syria. I mean, I think George, as a former foreign minister, can also talk about what states can do on more than one front at once. But, we haven't been talking about Sudan virtually at all for 14 months, and it's one of the worst conflicts on the planet. So I think governments and the media should do more to deal with multiple crises, which will always be the case. At once. Certainly the United Nations does its best to do that, but often that's not picked up in the media or by states.
Mm-hmm. What I would like to add is that Syria is indeed part of a pattern. As Ben has said, it is another case of the lawlessness that Israel demonstrates in the area. Attacks without provocation against a sovereign state. But it is not just a part of what Israel is doing in the area. Syria is a case that interests above all its own citizens, who are involved in a very, very bloody civil war for more than 15 years now. The situation is very fluid. Factors are present there. It was not just a conflict between various political, religious, ethnic groups within the country. It is another case of proxy war. What is important now is to have a full respect of the amnesty declared, protection of minorities, all minorities, but especially Christians and Alawites, and hoping that in the future we are going to have an inclusive future for Syria, including all the population, regardless of religious or ethnic divides. It is not going to be an easy task, but who could foresee just 15 days ago the fall of the Assad regime? Of course, a precondition for everything there is what all of us have underscored, the full respect of international legality, which is not just the sovereignty of states. This is, of course, one imperative, let's say, rule. It is also the protection of human rights of everybody, and especially the minorities.